All right, so let's get started. Today we're going to be having the Green Workforce panel. It will be an online conversation with forestry and conservation professionals. Again, this event is being hosted by Project Learning Tree Canada. Today we have Ritika Gupta, a policy analyst for the federal government. We also have Tyson Solemson, who is a project coordinator for the Tyson, can you say the name? I don't want to mess it up.
You bet. I work with the Doig River First Nation.
Yes, I was looking at it for a long time. I definitely did not want to mess it up. And we have Kendry Mercier, who is the Indigenous Relationships Project Manager from the Western Forest Products. And we also have Keontae Brown, who is Central Operations Manager and Education Lead for Outland Youth Employment Program, also known as OYEP. Today, before we get started, it is important that we introduce the team. My name is Jerry Taylor, and I'm the Director of Career Pathways. Also on this call today, we'll have Maria Chiarella, the Mentorship and Youth Programs Manager, as well as Brittany Lodge, our Youth Program Coordinator, and Lydia Cadan, our Education Programs Coordinator. Over to Zach. Oh, this is me again. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items. Live translation is available on Wordly and instructions will be on the following side. You are welcome to have your camera on or off. Please make sure throughout this presentation that you use the mute function. You can right-click on your name and add your preferred language as well as your pronouns and where you're calling from. Okay, so PLT Canada respectfully acknowledges that we work and grow within the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. PLT Canada is a program of the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, also known as SFI. SFI believes in a society that values and benefits from sustainably managed forests and the great outdoors. We are committed to using trees and forests as windows to the world to inspire action and grow future forest and conservation leaders. Our environmental education and professional development services, which include high-value work experiences and an industry-leading mentorship program, support youth access Canada on their green career pathways, including those in rural and Indigenous and in urban communities. Next slide, please. So as you can see, since 2018, we have placed over 6,000 youth in green jobs across 12 provinces and territories by supporting over 200 employers. Since 2020, we have also supported over 600 participants through our mentorship program in the United States and Canada and globally. This program has been essential for building key skills in both mentees and mentors like confidence, networking, and communication, coaching, and empathy. Next slide. Over to Maria.
Awesome. Thanks, Jerry and Zach. And hello, everyone. And thank you again to our awesome panelists that are here today. So I'm going to briefly go over the agenda today. First, we're going to do a brief introduction to today's session before we get to meet our four wonderful presenters. Afterwards, the audience will also have a chance to ask questions before we wrap up with some helpful resources to help you get started. So, with Canada having 9% of the world's forests, Canada's forest sector plays a pivotal role in sustainably managing and balancing economic, social, and environmental needs for today's and future generations. The forest sector has a huge role in growing jobs and supporting rural and northern communities, while also collaborating with Indigenous communities. It has the capacity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by sustainably managing forests that absorb carbon, conserve biodiversity, and produce sustainable wood products. Through fuel management, such as thinning forest stands and removing surface load fuel, it can also reduce forest fire risk. Canada adopted the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Goal 15, Life on Land, which includes an ambitious goal to ensure that all species have healthy and viable populations. In fact, by 2030, Canada is set to conserve 30% of land and inland waters and sustainably manage forests, lakes, and rivers. So opportunities within the forest sector vary, but as I shared in that last slide, there will be an influx on demand for green job sector professionals as part of Canada's national conservation and environmental goals. If you like working with tech, science, perhaps in the outdoors, in nature, with wood, machinery, and much other things, there will be opportunities for you. Furthermore, there are people who will be retiring in the upcoming years, and so the forest sector will need to fill this gap with new talent. So this leads into the reason as to why we're having this event today, to expose you to new careers within the forest and conservation sector, and for you to consider if these are career options that you would like to further explore. So with that, I am really eager to introduce you once again to our 4 amazing panelists. We have Ritika Gupta, Forestry Policy Analyst for the federal government, Tyson Solmonson, Program Coordinator for the Doig River First Nations lands, Kendry Mercer, our Indigenous Relationships Project Manager for Western Forest Products, and Keonti Brown, Central Operations Manager and Education Lead for the Outland Youth Employment Program. Each presenter will have 10 minutes to share about their career pathway, what a typical day looks like, and also share some tips for you. So let's get started. Ritika, you're up first.
Thanks, Maria. So hi, everyone. I'm Ritika, and I am a forester by training, and I work as a policy analyst at the Canadian Forest Service. So how I got here. So I'm from Toronto. For my undergrad, I studied political science, and then I followed that up with a master's in forest conservation. Forestry was definitely not my career choice. It was actually a backup to law school, which my Asian parents wished me to do. So after undergrad, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a brief idea that I wanted to go into aviation. So I was debating between environmental law program and forestry. And I was very conflicted in my decision because at that time I didn't really understand what forestry was. But my rationale was that, my master's program is 1.5 years. So after that, I could still pursue aviation if I wished. And whereas law school was more of a lifelong commitment. And so I went with forestry. And I had recalled I had taken a tropical forest course in undergrad. And it was one of the most interesting electives I had done. So I just went with it, to be honest. And the first semester in, I was really lost. I didn't understand what was being taught. And I had even called up the law school to see if they would readmit me, but they said no, so I stuck it through. And so what happened was in my first year, I landed a co-op with the Canadian Forest Service. So I interned there for about 3 months. And that's where it really clicked that I could actually blend my political science and forestry degree and focus in forest policy. And so I really enjoyed it. And so right after graduation, I landed an internship with Ontario's Provincial Ministry of Forestry and Natural Resources up in Sault Ste. Marie. So a week after graduation, I made the move up to Sault Ste. Marie. For those of you who don't know where that is, it's right next to Lake Superior, about 8 hours away from Toronto. And I did that for a year. So 6 months into my internship, the pandemic started. And so I was working from home in an apartment in Sault Ste. Marie. But it was kind of challenging, but it was interesting. And after I finished that internship, actually, the reason I mentioned that is, and I'll touch on it a bit later, my internship was very policy focused, but I was looking forward to doing some field work in the summer of that year. But because of the pandemic, I couldn't do most of my field work, which is okay. And so after I completed my internship, I got a communications assistant position at the Toronto office for MNRF. So I did that for about 6 months, and that was a good opportunity, and it gave me, I learned about the communication side of forestry, so it really gave me a different perspective, whereas in my other internship, it was more policy focused and into forest management planning. And after I completed my communication assistant contract, I came back to the Canadian Forest Service to work as a policy analyst. So I came full circle there. So what do I do as a policy analyst? So as a policy analyst, I must stay up to date with topical issues, trends, news related to forests, and analyze these to see if they could implicate Canada's forests and the forest sector in any way. So based on my research, I develop advice and recommendations for consideration by management to inform their policy decisions and also to inform policy development with respect to forests. So at CFS specifically, I work for the strategic policy team. strategic policy is really broad and really high level. And so it requires me to consult with different teams within the Canadian Forest Service that specialize in a specific area. So for example, there's a team on climate change, on wildfires, and international affairs. So I consult each of these teams to inform my advice and recommendations and provide advice to senior management. And so in my day-to-day work, I'm always collaborating with different multidisciplinary teams across the CFS. And so this is why in university and school, they focus a lot on group projects. It's because they teach you the skills and experiences needed to work with your teams and with different personalities. More often than not, most of the files you will work on will require collaboration to some extent. So you'll learn how to navigate the team dynamics and how to complete the task in an inclusive manner. And lastly, all aspects of my work require communication. So everything from writing emails to conversing with colleagues to briefing managers and different teams. As I mentioned, like I do a lot of research and analysis, and so I need to be able to condense the information and communicate it verbally and in written in a concise manner. And nowadays, now that most communication is done through email, chats, video, etc., like strong communication skills is very much needed. So in terms of tips for job seekers, these are some 4 tips that I found useful as I navigated my career journey. So first off, I suggest always including a cover letter in your applications. So cover letters take a lot of practice to perfect. So I suggest reach out to your career centers at your universities or colleges for advice. They're really helpful, and as well as get your professors or colleagues to proofread your cover letters. Second, if you're currently working in an organization doing an internship or a job, or even in university, reach out to your colleagues and within your network to learn about the different types of work being done within your organization. And it'll also help to build connections, especially in this virtual and hybrid environment where you might not encounter your colleagues in person. It is a little effort and it can be intimidating to reach out virtually, but there's different avenues you can use, like LinkedIn. You can send a quick email and see if they'll be willing to for like a 15-minute coffee chat, or even offer to send some questions through email. And generally people are willing to talk. Third is I suggest, if you don't already have a LinkedIn profile, put one together, because it is trending. A lot of companies, and just recently the government is now looking to LinkedIn as a recruitment tool. And lastly, for interviews, in the beginning, I really struggled with interviews. I suggest using the STAR method. And this method really helps you to structure your response. So the STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. And so if you use this method to structure your answers, it'll really help you keep on track without, rambling on. And also, when preparing for the interviews, look at the job description and highlight the skills and requirements they're asking for, and develop examples where and when you demonstrated that skill. And that will help you answer the questions. And if you have a few examples at hand, you can be better prepared for some questions you didn't expect, for example. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Ritika, for sharing your experience. Up next is Tyson.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tyson Salmonson. I am the Lands Program Coordinator for the Doig River First Nation. So I'm based out of Western Canada. I spend a little bit of my time in Prince George and a little bit of my time in Fort St. John. The actual Doig River Reservation is about an hour north of Fort St. John. It's its own little community. So in regards to my career pathway, pretty much everyone in my family is engaged in the resource industry in one way or another. My brother is a logger, my grandfather is a forester, my father is a truck driver. So sort of the resource industry is pretty ingrained in my family, as well as sort of these rural towns that I grew up in. I grew up in Prince George. I graduated from the Resource Management Bachelor of Science program at UMBC a few years ago. Really what started me on forestry was my grandfather. We would go out on the weekends and I would help him do some weekend work, unpaid, of course. Handle the plot cord, go out and drive some roads, all that good stuff. My first job related to the green jobs industry, or the resource industry, is a junior research intern at the Eliza Lake Research Forest. That is the research forest that is tied to the university. So there's lots of different types of research forestry and other things that take place there. After that, I did some layout. I was a ribbon monkey for a few seasons. Then I was a TA. And then just during the pandemic, I took a short contract to manage a provincial park in the Lower Mainland, if anyone's driven by there. And then just recently in the last few years, I've sort of shifted over to First Nations project management, and that's where I expect that I'll stay. I'm a project manager by profession, I guess you could say, and that's where I expect to continue working for the next foreseeable future. Next slide, please. So in terms of my job, working for a First Nation, really what the bottom line is I'm helping the First Nation exercise their treaty rights on the land. Way back in the day when all of the First Nations signed the treaties, the government did give them some rights, and now here in the current world, we're helping sort of exercise those rights. So Doig is Treaty 8. The previous First Nation that I worked for was non-treaty, so they have sort of different but similar rights. Really what takes up a lot of my time as a program coordinator is ensuring that all different levels of government and industry and anyone who wants to work on the land is following sort of things that are laid out in our policies. We engage with all different levels of government. Just recently, there was the Blueberry Court case and the Yahe decision, which really plays a big part in the cumulative impact of the industry on the land. So up until recently, the cumulative impact on the land hasn't really been recognized. And if one oil and gas person puts a well here and then another one gets put up 10 years later, there hasn't really been anything in the law that says, what is the cumulative impact on the land of these things. So that's really been a huge focus for my lands department. A First Nation has a lot of different departments, right? There's the health department that services the health of the nation. There's lots of different departments, land code, infrastructure. It's a whole little community out there, and the First Nation needs everything that a normal community would need in terms of department and governmental support. So I work in what's called a lands department. So we deal with land issues. We deal with referrals and all that stuff that I mentioned previously. A lot of First Nations are utilizing what's called a referral process. So mostly when it comes to applying for permits, if you're an industry player and you want to apply for a permit, you apply through the government. The government then goes to interested First Nations and says, hey, what do you think of this permit? We're interested in engaging in consultation. And that's most of what I spend my time doing. Other than that, there's lots of special projects that we do. I try to get out in the field as much as I can, but I would say most of my time is spent in the office. In terms of advice for people who are students or just new into the industry, I would really emphasize taking advantage of internships and other things when you're doing your degree. I really can't stress this enough, but go out and make connections, join clubs, make friends, engage with your professors, which I know can be harder at bigger schools. I'm really lucky at UNBC. I usually had a direct line on a lot of my professors. But really just integrate into the community, and those connections that you form as a young person or as a student really help branch out and will help you in your career later on. Same thing with internships. I was really lucky to internship at the Research Forest for 2 years. I think that was really beneficial in terms of my career path. In addition to that, if you're looking for a more technical role, I would consider pursuing a STEM degree or a BSc. Professional designations are really important in a lot of fields. Professional engineers, biologists, agrologists, foresters, all that stuff. Really, really important for landing a job and also making positive change in this green jobs industry. In addition to that, I mentioned it previously, and it does kind of suck, but you have to be on LinkedIn. It's really important in terms of looking for jobs and networking and all of that. And if you're against social media, which a lot of people are, I think, nowadays. I would still recommend getting to LinkedIn. You know, it's very important to reach out and create those connections. Okay, that was my last slide, actually. Yeah, at the end, I'm sure we can chat and I'll take some questions. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Tyson. And absolutely great tip on LinkedIn and the importance of networking. Kendry, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kendry Mercer, and I am the Indigenous Relationships Project Manager for Western Forest Products. Really happy to be here talking to you guys today. I am calling in from Nanoose Bay, British Columbia on Vancouver Island in the traditional territory of the Snanawas, Nanaimo, and Qualicum First Nations. So, how did I get into forestry? So it's all in, you can go back to the last slide there, Maria. Thank you. So it's all in our family. My dad was a registered professional forester. There's a picture of my dad and my brother and myself when we were young. He passed along his love of the outdoors. He came from a family of 11 kids. He had 7 brothers, and he was the only forester in the bunch. The rest of his brothers ended up being doctors, but he seemed pretty happy with his career choice. So he kind of brought us up, and he was in soil science, and so our family did a lot of trips and looked at a lot of soil pits, and I grew to have a really good comfort level without being out in the woods. I grew up in Victoria. When I was in high school, got to sort of see Clapwood and War in the Woods, and heard a lot of sort of the political side of forestry just through education and growing up. I didn't really understand clearly what was happening there, but it was definitely front and center, and I had an interest in it. When I was looking at post-secondary career paths, I knew that I enjoyed working outside and I was comfortable in the woods. I didn't necessarily have forestry at top of mind, but there was an expectation to go to university. So I was kind of looking to see what there was, and I ended up seeing the University of British Columbia degree in forestry resource management. One of the reasons why I chose it was because it was a directed career path. It sort of seemed like out of all of the general degrees, it came out with a registered professional forestry designation or the ability to get that. And also it had the prospects of having a well-paying summer job that helped me pay my way through school. So all things forestry. In the pictures there, I ended up marrying a forester. So in the top left there by the big tree, that's my husband. He also works in the industry. My kids are also active in the outdoors. And the bottom picture there was my very first summer job, was doing salal cedar hemlock research. And those trees were quite small when I started, and I was able to go back a couple of years ago and take a tour group around, and I was just pleased to see how well they were growing, how big they'd become, which means I've been here for quite a while. Next slide. Thank you. So I am a registered professional forester, and thought I'd talk to you guys a little bit about that professional designation. In British Columbia, all forestry, professional forestry needs to be practiced by registered professionals. So to do that, it's a combination of getting a degree, getting experience. You have to practice for 2 years under a mentor and demonstrate that you've learned knowledge. And then you also have to have a code of ethics and professional conduct. So once you've done all of those things, you get your right to title and your right to practice. So I am an RPF, which is a professional forester. There's also other career pathways within the profession, technologists, accredited silviculture surveyors, timber cruisers, and other natural resource professionals. So it's been in the industry, there's a lot of jobs that require a professional designation. I think Tyson was talking about that as well, but it was a good way of going straight from university into a career in with the forest industry. So working in the industry, I've put a bunch of pictures in here, but so I work for Western Forest Products, and have in one form or another worked for the company for most of my career. So Western is a forest company. We're the largest coastal tenure holder and manufacturer in British Columbia. So it has a lot of opportunities, straight from kind of growing the seeds to grow the trees that we plant, growing and stand tending, planning the future harvest, managing the forest, and then manufacturing, transporting, and all the way through to finished product. So the company employs 3,500 employees and contractors. So within the company itself, there's this diverse range of different green jobs that you can have. So I've really enjoyed my opportunities there. The industry is more than just logging and planting trees. It's sort of a full cycle of forest management. So having the opportunity to work for a company that does a lot of different things has exposed me to many aspects of the industry, which I'm really grateful for. In British Columbia, the majority of lands are publicly owned. And so your direction comes from the provincial and federal government and to reflect publicly held values on forestry, both social, economic, environmental. So there's quite a few varied tasks for forest professionals. So what does a typical day in the profession look like? So currently I'm working for our Indigenous relationships team. Western operates within the traditional territories of over 45 First Nations. And it's really, it's been sort of a privilege to work and to be in this time where Indigenous relationships and Indigenous rights are front and center. I think as a forester, we've worked with Indigenous people in looking at land values for a long time, but it's really coming to the forefront and important in all aspects of our business. So my role is looking to understand Indigenous values and interests, to look for mutual beneficial relationships that we have in our working relationships. And really, for the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, it's kind of putting that into practice every day in what we're doing. So a couple of the pictures there is sharing information sort of with public, sort of externally facing information about what our practices are, gathering information about what people's interests are in, internally communicating our plans, understanding First Nations values. That bottom left picture on the screen was really unique. One of the things that our company is doing is working with nations on large cultural cedar. So one of the fellow in the picture there is a guardian for one of the local nations. And so when we do our layout, if there are large cedar trees, which the nations have kind of come up with the parameters around what would make a large cultural cedar, they go out and they confirm that in the woods, and then we set aside a certain amount of those trees for First Nations cultural use. So I've been pretty excited to be a part of that process. Another thing that I get to do is help with integrated resource management planning. So that's a sort of a landscape level planning process. The particular map image there is one that is Indigenous led with traditional territories from First Nation. And it's kind of looking at the landscape and determining values that are important to nations, and then kind of building practice around that. And then the final picture in the corner is what I spend a lot of my time on Teams meetings, which I'm sure a lot of you folks do. As your career progresses, you spend more and more time in the office and less time in the field. So I guess tips for entering a job like this. I guess go to career fairs, talk to people about what there is out there. There's sort of a breadth of experience and opportunity. Volunteer if there's an opportunity to volunteer. network, try and gain an understanding of what, what work life will look like. If you can find internships or summer jobs that are relevant and will provide exposure. I find, like, when I started out, I didn't know where I would land. I didn't know really what was out there, but there's a lot, and there'll be something that you'll find interesting that you have a passion for. You just probably don't know exactly what that is yet, but you can find out by talking to people. Think about where you want to live and where you're willing to live, what you want your day to look like. I'm a mother of 2 kids, and I was lucky enough to be able to have a career and work-life balance and raise the kids. And it's something that you don't necessarily think about when you're starting off in your career, but it's definitely something that becomes very front and center as soon as you start moving into your family life. Keep an open mind, positive attitude, listen, come to things like this. And one thing that I've really appreciated in the industry is and just in life, is that you can learn from everyone. So, just kind of take that time, listen, and yeah, learn and share. And that's all for me. Thanks very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Kindri, and for just sharing your experience and sharing how important it is to build meaningful relationships in the forest sector and with First Nations as well, and just showing how dynamic positions can be as well. Up next, we have Chianti. Take it away, Chianti.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, PLT, for having me today. There's been some great presentations already. Feel free to put any questions in the chat, or I'm happy to answer anything after the presentation as well too. So as mentioned, my name is Chianti Brown. I work with the Outland Youth Employment Program in the role of an operations manager and education lead. So to front load a little bit, I'll just explain a little bit about what we do at OYEP, because it can be a little bit complex. OYEP is what we call it for short. We run summer employment programs for Indigenous youth across Canada. So we're providing work experience, education, and training within the natural resource sector, along with our wraparound support services that are available to participants throughout the year as well. Awesome. So a little bit about my career pathway. So I was born and raised in Toronto, Ontario, but I've spent a lot of time in Northern Ontario. And I really love spending time outside. So I knew that when I was entering the workforce, I wanted to do something that allowed me to kind of pursue some of my passions as well, being as outdoorsy as I was. And unfortunately, Toronto just wasn't that place for me. My first job in the green sector, I was employed with Ontario Parks at Owenda Provincial Park in Tiny, Ontario. At 14 and 15 years old. So that was my very first job. I was quite young, but it was a good introduction to the sector. And the sector is so vast in terms of what jobs you're able to obtain as well. And then I kind of continued to pursue that and became a tree planter. So I started specifically in forestry as a tree planter with Outland in Kapuskasing, Ontario in 2017. And I did that for 3 years. And it was just really incredible, I think, for myself to kind of explore forestry-based work and also network with people in the industry and learn more about the forestry cycle and everything that it involves. And then from my first year of tree planting as a rookie tree planter, I was introduced to what is called the Outland Youth Employment Program. And I actually went directly after finishing my contract tree planting, I went directly into working as an intern with the Outland Youth Employment Program. And I learned a lot from the program, the same way that the youth participating in the program do, because we're basically just giving exposure to all the different career pathways, training opportunities, and supports available within the natural resources sector. So along with the youth learning about all the opportunities that are available, I really, I think, developed a lot of knowledge around forestry and conversation and natural resources in general. And then my education, I took a program at Laurentian University. It's a Bachelor of Physical Education, but it had a focus on outdoor adventure leadership. So someone taking physical ed at the university level would come out with the same degree. I was just really interested in some of the other opportunities, excuse me, in terms of, wilderness survival. I was able to go to Japan in 2019 for 3 weeks on an expedition in Daisetsuzan National Park, which was really exciting for me. And I also took concurrent education at the same time. So it was a 5-year program. I think there's only 2 or 3 universities in Canada that provide this program, but basically it's a condensed version of Teachers College. So you do it at the same time that you would do your undergrad. And I think that was really beneficial to me because I was able to come out of the program at year 5 with 2 degrees, and also experience working in schools, but then also on the outdoor ed side as well too. And then lastly, I took the opportunity to take a lot of Indigenous studies classes while I was in university, and I was able to get a minor in Indigenous studies, which was something that really interests me, and it's something that I work in directly now, and I'm constantly engaging with Indigenous people and communities. So I'm really glad that I kind of took that pathway as well. Okay, so this is just basically a breakdown of all the jobs that I've worked from high school until now. It's a little bit diverse. If you were to look at my resume today, it would probably only include the work that I've done with Outland and the Outland Employment Program. But I think it's important to kind of note some of the other mundane jobs that I was able to do throughout university to support me in putting myself through university as well. So as I mentioned, I worked at Awenda Provincial Park for a couple of summers. I also worked at Mastermind Toys in the off season in high school. I grew up ski racing, so I did ski coach on and off through university. That was more so just a bit of a passion of mine and being able to be outdoors. I also worked as a barista at an espresso bar while I was in university, and I learned how to make some really great coffee. So that helps me out today too. And then kind of moving into more of my professional career, I started as a tree planter, and I would recommend anybody to go tree planting if you're interested in the industry to kind of learn about the different cycles and employment opportunities. It's also a really good way to kind of test your persistence and your grit as well. So that's been really useful to me. I also, in my 2nd year and 3rd year tree planting, I worked as a safety officer, and that's something that I'm really passionate about and something that I am continuing to be involved in my role now. So I'm glad that I was able to take that opportunity at that time because I'm still very much passionate about it. As I mentioned, I went directly into working with the Outland Youth Employment Program. So that's kind of just summer-based work at that time. A few years from there, I supervised for the first time a camp in Alberta. And then COVID hit, as we all know. So a lot of my schooling went remotely for my last year of school. And I was approached by Outland, seeing if I was looking for work. And I actually agreed to go manage a camp for the Minnesota Transmission Project, and then moved into the Wataynikaneyap Project. So that's something that was a little different, mainly camp and catering based, but servicing Indigenous communities and servicing industry who's working on the traditional territories of First Nations. For these 2 projects, it was specific to building transmissions lines so that they're able to be powered by the power grid. I supervised another year of OYAP, and then while I was completing school during COVID, I took on the position of an education lead with OYAP. So I want to say that is more of like a support role. I was working on kind of developing some of our handbooks around education, teacher guidance, because we do offer co-op credits to the youth that participate in the program. And that kind of I did that for about a year, and then that moved me into the position of operations manager and education lead that I'm currently in. Perfect. So a day in the life of an operations manager, what I can say is that every day is different. So there's a lot of office-based work, but also a lot of field-based work. So it's important for me to kind of remain adaptable and remain flexible, because oftentimes things will come up and you'll have to kind of pivot what your plan was for that week. I do as much community involvement as possible. So that might include attending community events such as powwows or elder and youth gatherings, just to be involved in the community and volunteer at those events to give back as much as possible. My role does involve some recruitment and travel as well. So I'll be hitting the road in the next couple of weeks to basically go to high schools and band offices to meet with youth who are looking just like yourselves to look to enter the workforce within the green sector. So I'll deliver presentations, speak to them, kind of answer any questions that they might have, and flag them for the hiring season. A lot of my off season does involve some desk work. So I work on, and this is something that I wouldn't say I necessarily have the background for, but I've been learning as I go. And I'm surprisingly interested in it, but a lot of reporting, a lot of funding, a lot of proposal writing as well too. That could be to different governments or industry, for example. And then as we're moving into our busiest season in the summer, I do have a lot of like scheduling for trainers, booking accommodations, coordinating, hiring staff, hiring cooks, all that type of stuff. So all the little nitty gritty stuff in between. I work on supplying the youth that participate in the program with high school co-op credits and trying to develop that curriculum as well too. Our wraparound services, that's basically what we provide in the off season. So we're working with youth for, advanced training, post-secondary education, scholarship writing, basically anything that they're experiencing a barrier to or that they might need support with. Oftentimes we'll have youth come to us asking for support, and we'll provide that support and kind of put the dots in line on what the next steps are. And then in the summer, I manage 3 sites in Ontario specifically and about 100 staff in total. Awesome. So in terms of tips for job seekers, the one thing that I can say has really helped me get to where I am is I've always said yes to every opportunity. I don't think I've ever said no to doing some form of work that might have been contractual. It might have been a change in what I was doing or supposed to be doing, but maybe the organization needed support elsewhere. And I've heard from a couple higher up managers over the years that I've been known as someone that is super reliable and someone that will always say yes. So sometimes it's not the most glamorous positions. I can think back to working at a fire base in Pickle Lake, which is the most northern road access point in Ontario for reference. It was not a very fun job. I was there for about 2 weeks, but I did it and I showed up. And I think that's what employers are really looking for. Not every day is going to be the best day in the world, but as long as you're open to trying new experiences, I think it really will support you. This has been mentioned, but volunteering with agencies that you'd like to work with in terms of networking and just getting to know more people as well will certainly support you. If you can get an education. So I thought growing up that I never would have been able to get an education just from a financial perspective. But with support from OSAP and working through high school and university, I was able to do that. And I think there's a lot of supports available too that I wasn't necessarily aware of, that even if it doesn't seem like it's a possibility that you are able to do. So I think an education is like the one thing that nobody can ever take away from you. And it's just really crucial as well if it is within the realm of your world. I think too, being like personable, relatable, and getting to know the employer, and that comes back to networking as well too, has really supported me. I know of one mentor of mine who was able to kind of advocate on my behalf as well, to be able to get to the place that I am now. So just developing those relationships, I think, are super key. interesting one. So in my role now, the phrase "fake it till you make it," what I can kind of attribute that to is I'm being put into situations in my current role that, you know, aren't always the most comfortable. It's a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I might not appear unconfident on the outside, although I might be feeling that in the inside. So just try to put yourself out there, be as confident as possible, and it will really bring you a lot of places, I think. And along with that, uncomfortable situations create the most growth. So you're never going to grow where you're comfortable. So you want to be able to put yourself out there, do things that are a little bit more difficult or a little bit out of your comfort zone, and that's where you'll create the most growth. And along with that, you'll learn more from your mistakes and successes. So all those successes are really amazing and they feel really good. Everybody makes mistakes and that's completely okay. It's just a matter of what you take away from that. And I think mistakes are the perfect opportunity to kind of look at it from a bird's eye view and identify, you know, what you'll do to do better next time. And that's what I always tell the youth that I work with as well, that, you know, it's okay to make mistakes. It's just how you move forward and learn from them. And last but not least, actions speak louder than words. So you don't always have to be, you know, the loudest person in the room or anything like that. But if you show up and you do the work and you're consistent, it won't go unnoticed.
Thank you so much, Chianti, for sharing, and as well to all of our speakers, Ritika, Tyson, and Kendri. I've loved hearing a bit more about your career pathways. And I think it's really important to realize that everyone has different routes to get into the career that they are now, but that also shows what the diversity in the forest sector and how many opportunities they are. So thank you all for that. If you have any questions for our panelists, please make sure to put them in the chat. We have some activity already, and I see that 2 panelists have responded to a question. So I'd like to post this question to Kendri and then Chianti from a participant. And so Jen has asked, how do the professionals on the panel see the forestry industry opening up to more remote work in order to assist more differently abled workers who cannot be in the field or on the road traveling to access these amazing careers? Kendri, did you want to go first?
Sure. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to work remotely, particularly in fields where you know, you don't physically need to be in a place. GIS would be one that would come to mind. I know with our job market being a lot, there's a lot more opportunity out there now. There's a lot of roles that need to be filled, and there seems to be more of an appetite to have different skill sets come in remotely and provide that service. So it's sometimes a little bit difficult to kind of get your foot in the door if you are remote. So sometimes there's a little bit of travel up front or making some sort of personal connection to a company or to an employer, like show that you are willing to be there in person for a portion of the time. And then once they build that comfort level, then having the opportunity to remotely work at least a portion of the time is there. Thanks.
Thank you. And Chianti, I'll pose the question again. How do the professionals on the panel see the forestry industry opening up to more remote work in order to assist more differently abled workers who can't be in the field or on the road traveling, so they can also access these amazing careers?
For sure. Yeah. So just to build off what was said, I think all industries, including natural resources, is really evolving. I think it's a very pivotal time right now in terms of some of the accommodations that are being able to be provided. There's also a huge conversation around environmental social governance as well too, and diversity and inclusion. So I think slowly but surely the industry is focusing on those other diverse perspectives that are able to contribute to the workforce. And I think just being able to remind them that, you know, even though you might not be in that exact location, if you're willing to travel in certain circumstances, I think that would look really good, but also kind of reminding them what you're bringing to the table. And a lot of the positions, I know it's been said, but there's so many diverse positions in natural resources. So if you want to be in the field 24/7, I'm sure there's availability for that. Or if you want to be working at a computer every day, then I think there's opportunity for that as well too. So I think it's just kind of the political and economic atmosphere that we're working in right now. It's shifting, and I'm thinking that there will be more availability for that type of work in the near future.
Thank you, Kianti. So I see another question here from Emily, who's asked, Ritika, did you find...
Hold on one second, Maria. I did want to answer that question for the caller on this webinar. So I want to share with everybody on this call, I do have a disability. I have epilepsy. And I will say that the sector is changing a lot. When I first came to SFI, I'll be honest, I didn't know that they would accept me with a disability, so I did not share it. But through this last year, I had a couple seizures, and I'll be honest with you, companies are willing to work with you if you do have a disability. And that one of the things that I do have to do is show up, quarterly for meetings, and they support that. But there are accommodations that you can receive. And so just making sure that you have proper documentation. And the reason why I didn't want to interrupt anybody like that, but I just wanted to share because I am an example of a person with a disability that's working in this sector. So there are many jobs, desk jobs. Sometimes I have to be out on the road. There are a lot of accommodations that companies do have in the sector. So thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, for sharing. Okay, so back to Ritika. So Ritika, this question is from Emily, and they were asking, did you find having the RPF designation was critical/useful in landing a policy job?
Yes, definitely. So before I get to that, I'm going to touch on the previous question and then get to this. It's related. So when I first started my forestry career, it was a policy position, right? But when I worked for the MNRF in Sault Ste. Marie, in between I was applying to jobs, but what was really limiting me, even for urban forestry jobs, like within the city, was the fact I didn't have a driver's license. That was very limiting to me. Also, as a woman of color, I'm Indian, and I was not comfortable moving up to a rural town in the middle of nowhere. So real example is when I finished my internship, I was offered a few forester positions way up north, like Deer Lake, and I had to Google where these places were. And the pandemic had started by then, and I was just, for me, like as much as I wanted the job, what was limiting was I didn't have a driver's license, but even if I did, as a woman of color, I would not be comfortable moving up. It's just not to say, like, Sault Ste. Marie was a very pleasant experience. Like, people are so kind, but there's so many factors that you have to consider when moving up. Like, as a woman, like, would my forestry decisions be accepted by the community? Would I be respected? There's just so many factors. But coming to my point about the RPF designation, definitely. So after I finished university, I got my forestry degree, and my 1-year internship in Sault Ste. Marie was really what contributed to getting my RPF hours that you have to get and to put in to get this certification. So most certainly, my internship got me the forest management planning experience as well as the policy experience, and that contributed to me getting my RPF license, and that helped me then land my policy analyst position at CFS. And so having the RPF license is, to employers, it assures them that you know your forestry knowledge and you have that experience. And so in that regard, it is super helpful and I think critical in the forestry career. And also just on one other point I want to touch on is like the diversity of career pathways. You can do policy, economics, finance, even communications, graphic designing. So there's a lot of forestry jobs in the margins that you don't need to be in the field per se to be contributing to the sustainable management of forests. You can do it on the side related on different aspects. So economics, for example, like doing, for example, in that you would analyze, I don't know, the cost of species or stumpage related, that is all computer work. So within your organizations, you can definitely, or the organizations you're wanting to work for, reach out, network, look at their website to see what aspect of that company maybe what can offer you that office experience, I guess, if that makes sense. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Tika. So I see a question for Megan as well, and I think it's really interesting. Megan asks, what were some of the most surprising parts of your career journey / path? So I'd like to ask that to Tyson.
For sure. Could you repeat the question quickly?
Yeah, what were some of the most surprising parts of your career journey / path?
For sure. I would say probably my transition into working with First Nations. It wasn't something that ever came up in my radar at all. When I was in high school there, I think there was like one First Nations class offered as an elective. And then when I went to UNBC, it really opened up my eyes in terms of really the struggle of Indigenous peoples and how Canadian politics and Indigenous politics are so closely interrelated. When I got out of high school, I wanted to be a forester, and then from moving forward now is still a young adult, I guess. I want to, yeah, it's very surprising how much goes into Indigenous relations and supporting First Nations.
Mhm. Thank you. And Kendry, I also would like to pose this question to you. What were some of the most surprising elements of your career journey / path when you were first starting out?
Well, I think when I was first starting out, it was what it was actually like to move from sort of a medium-sized city like Vancouver or Victoria up into a community of 2,000 people where it rained all the time. So it wasn't. I think I knew that I would always be willing to go different places, but it was actually quite a shock to arrive at those places and be living there. But it's great. It wasn't. It was a time that I really enjoyed. And I think where a lot of forestry is done, where there's a lot of interface, is a lot of these smaller communities. And then another thing is sort of progressing through my career is just the role of communications in forestry. I mean, when I started out, I would be in the woods all day and not talk to anyone all day. And then now it sort of seems as your career progresses, communicating both internally with the folks that you're working with, and also sort of externally to the public and to stakeholder groups, nations. You spend a lot of your time sharing information about what you do and communicating, how resource management works. So that was another thing that was unexpected.
Thank you. So I see a question here. It says, this is from Ben, and they're asking, have the concepts of generative agriculture or permaculture met the mainstream forestry space yet? I can imagine a lot of opportunities for mixed use forest stand models that blend timber and food production. As food insecurity and growing population increases, demand for nutrient-dense food, I am wondering, how is the industry adapting to address this growing concern? Ritika, I'm curious to know if you have any policy knowledge on this question, and I can repeat it as well if you would like.
Sure. Actually, yeah, no repeat needed. So just speaking to my experience and my knowledge in Asia and in Europe, it's agroforestry is a very common and practiced concept, which is integrating trees and farms and trying to utilize the maximum output of trees and the crops planted. In Canada, I'm not too familiar, but I can say regenerative agriculture is definitely trending, and there is work being done upon in terms of agroforestry in Canada. But it's emerging. It's definitely emerging, but I don't have further knowledge on that.
Awesome, thank you. So I see a question now from Nirali, and so they're saying that they're a newcomer to Canada and they're into digital marketing and communications for the past 6 years. They're actively looking for opportunities in the green sector. Are there any courses or certifications that they can get into to support their experience to get a spot in the green sector? Chianti, I'd love to hear if you know of any courses or certifications that you would encourage Nirali to take.
Yeah, for sure. I think like a lot of entry level certifications, such as first aid, I'm taking May Assist training in March, which I'm really looking forward to. Basically anything that you can put on your resume, even if it isn't specifically forestry based, I think is good, because, you know, everything's safety focused, or maybe you've taken a course on HR that's still involved in forestry very much. So I would recommend starting with some of those courses. I would look to universities and colleges. I was just on the Sioux College website the other week, and I noticed that they have a bunch of micro training courses. So it's kind of like an introduction and you get a certification out of it. But it's not like a full term course necessarily. So I think I would probably pursue any credentials and certifications that you can get out of universities and colleges. And I think I have one other point there, but I might have forgotten it. Yeah, basically anything that you can add to your resume, I think is very beneficial.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Actually, if I could add to that,
Yes.
since you already have digital marketing and communications background, maybe you can take a course in natural resources or environmental sustainability, and then you can blend those two skills and they will complement each other. And so you have this communications background, but you also know about environment and sustainability, lost the word, and natural resources, for example. So that might be a way. That's one approach you could consider.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, sorry, that I think PLT is a great resource, and I wish I had known about them when I was starting my career, because PLT does a really great job at setting up workshops like these. So getting involved with those, and the mentorship program as well too, is a great opportunity to get some of that firsthand experience, and then, you know, put it on your resume and be able to speak to it as well.
Thank you. I also wanted to add to that because I saw another piece of this question that was in translation. And part of the question is, I'm coming from another country and would like to transition into the forestry sector in Canada. And one of the things that I was sharing, because my background is in career counseling, was that it would be great to also get with organizations that are looking for people that are from outside of Canada, because they will pay for visas. Also, sometimes when you transfer your credits from another country, your credits have to be audited, and sometimes it impacts you having the certification that you thought you would have had in your previous country. And to get your credits checked out, which there is an organization, I can send that at the end of this presentation. Roughly it's like $200, but you can work with companies that are looking for more voices to come to the table and diverse voices, but also making sure you're linked where they have professional development and connections with colleges, because for those courses that are not accepted in your country per se, they will support you in getting those last few classes, especially with limited diversity in the sector as well. And this came from a woman of color. So I just wanted to let you know that that is the process, is making sure that you get your transcripts audited, and then finding companies that are willing to give a work visa. And again, use programs like PLT, Green Jobs. We do have a newcomers program. Also use newcomer resources as well once you come into a space, because there are so many resources that we have for newcomers that we do not have for even citizens sometimes in certain countries. So I would say definitely use every resource. There are also community centers that offer career counseling, like Ritika said. So just using all kinds of outside resources. And you have a lot of great people on this panel, so definitely try to connect with them on LinkedIn. So there's all those great things that you can do as well.
Absolutely. So I'd like to pose this question to all of our panelists today, which is, what brings you the most joy in your current position? So Kendry, I'd like to start with you.
That one's easy. The people that I work with. So it's almost common passion. Working in a place where you enjoy your work is a lot of the people that you end up working with are also, you know, equally interested and engaged in their work. And so I think through all of my career, it's been really great having different teams getting exposure to different people, and then just, you know, supporting each other through different projects and, you know, phases of work and life. So.
Thank you. Tyson, what about you?
Definitely being able to support Indigenous and First Nations people to the degree that I do. It's really nice working for First Nation. You know, there's it's such an evolving and sort of, I guess, new industry. It feels like a one-to-one effort to improvement ratio. You know, for every bit of effort I put in, there's tangible change on the land and with the people that is very positive and brings me much joy.
Thank you. What about you, Ritika?
For me is the fact that I can contribute to the sustainability of forests indirectly through policy, and counter to, you know, the common media. You know, climate change is real, but there's a lot being done in the background and on the sidelines to mitigate that. And also the fact that, like, there's just so many different types of forests, and just learning about it. And also, like, forestry for me was definitely a breath of fresh air. Like, as I mentioned, I didn't know what it was, and, you know, Asian parents' pressure is really real. And law school, I knew I wasn't going to be happy in law school, and I'm really glad I chose forestry.
Thank you. And Chianti.
Yeah, that's a great question. For myself, the thing that probably brings me the most joy in my role, because it can oftentimes be difficult, especially when you're working with Indigenous communities, because you really see the realities that they go through, which oftentimes is really difficult to watch and support them through. But at the end of the day, when I hear really positive stories of youth that have overcome some of these challenges, or they've received employment, just making a difference in the lives of youth, the lives of the youth, and some of the stories that they might come up to me or share with me that I didn't realize that I did anything that would have even really impacted them, and then you hear from it afterwards, is really just like, it reinforces why I'm doing this work at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for sharing your responses. I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up today. This question is from Jen, and they're asking, does anyone know of any courses for new immigrants to educate themselves on respectfully working with First Nations in Canada? Chianti, would you know of any courses?
Yeah, so we're working with Forest Products Association of Canada. They have a cultural awareness course, which I'm pretty sure you could reach out to them to get. I think any type, you know, especially coming from another country to Canada, having the knowledge of some of the working relationships and the history around treaties and everything in between regarding First Nations communities is really important to be able to work with them in a mutually beneficial way, and in a place of allyship as well. So I would definitely recommend taking those courses. I try to take them as much as possible when new ones come up. The other one that I'm speaking to directly right now is with Warrior Supplies and Superior Strategies, based out of Thunder Bay, Ontario. It's an Indigenous owned organization, and I would always look to Indigenous owned organizations as well, because they're the ones who should be telling those stories, not other organizations. So I would check that out, and then just Google. There might be other training or workshops that are closer to your region as well. But if anyone wants to reach out to me afterwards, please feel free to reach out to Maria for my contact info, and I can help with that as well too, because I think it is important.
Thank you. And in the chat, my colleague Zach also shared that SFI and PLT Canada offers the Understanding and Upholding the Duty of Consult course through Sioux College. So he's put the link in the chat as well for anyone to check out.
Before we get started, real quick, Maria, I just wanted to make sure that the youth on this call understand that you do not need a college degree to enter into the forest sector. I think it's important that we say that because sometimes we don't acknowledge that. And so I think it's important that you know that once you leave high school, there are, as you know, working in the bush, there are so many different jobs in this sector that do not require college degrees. I'll give you an example of one I found out in America. A seeder makes $100,000 in the United States. I think I should be a seeder. So I think it's important that you don't limit yourself to thinking that I have to go to college, I have to get a PhD, I have to do this. No, we need you everywhere. Receptionists are accepted in green jobs. We need all kinds of jobs in this green space. And so I just think it's important that we share that there's so many different pathways you're going to go on in life and that there are so many options. And college is not affordable. I mean, it wasn't affordable for me. So I just think it's important that we share that there are many ways to do the work that you want to do and your passion in this space. So I just want to make sure we shared that.
Thank you, Jerry. Absolutely. That's a really good point that you can have different levels of education to enter the forest sector. I myself started tree planting, and that's how I kind of got in. But yes, I wanted to share some resources because I know we are just on time for wrapping up today's event. Just so you all are aware, we recently launched our Forest Quest online game, which is an interactive online game for youth ages 14 and above to learn about forestry, why forests matter, the benefits of sustainable forest management, and the impacts of forests on people's lives. We're also going to be sharing the links to our Voices of Indigenous Professionals and the Journeys of Black Professionals in Green Careers. Both these resources share inspiring stories and career pathways of Indigenous and Black professionals who are making an impact in the forest sector in North America. Please note that in order to access the resources, you will need to create separate accounts on 2 different websites. And lastly, we will also be sharing our Green Jobs quiz to help you identify potential career types based on your personality. And also, one more thing, our career fact sheet. So these give you an idea of what skills and education you will need for various positions that we talked about today and more. Awesome. So with that, I want to give a huge thank you again to our panelists, Ritika, Tyson, Kinji, and Kianti for sharing your time today and sharing your knowledge. And of course, thank you everyone that came out today. And we're really excited to see you at the next event. Thank you.
If you would like a work experience in the forest and conservation sector, or would like to learn about our mentorship program and career resources, visit pltcanada.org.